Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, after all these years, hope you got it. It's jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd love you to subscribe, rate, and review us, 5 stars, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. And if indeed you are enjoying the show, we do hope that you share it with others as well. All right, as for this episode, to provide perspective on Israel post-October 7th and the region in general, our featured guest is Hussain Abdul-Hussain, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, or FDD. Hussain joins us now on the line via Zoom from his home office. Hussain, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, usually at the top of the show, Hussain, I share a little of my guest bio, but you have an exceptionally fascinating background that I'd love our listeners to hear, and I'd love them to hear it directly from you. So do share, if you would, your journey and how you really got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, I'm both Iraqi and Lebanese. I grew up in both countries. When I was a kid in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, used to go out to the street with the school to cheer for him. And toward middle school, high school, and college, I was in Lebanon and spent time growing up there. Beautiful memories. And then I took a job at the Daily Star, which was a newspaper in Lebanon, and worked as a reporter on the ground, reporting from the field. I was in Iraq, in Baghdad, when the regime fell, Saddam Hussein regime. And also after that, I worked as a managing editor. Now, my politics have changed over time, and that's primarily because of the access that I got. I studied history and archaeology at the American University of Beirut, and that gave me access to literature that's otherwise unavailable to many others, like my peers and my generation at the time. And I got hooked up, if you want, on ideas of liberty and freedom and equality, and that was part of my activism as a student activist. I was in student government, student newspaper, and when the Iraq War came, I supported it, because to me there was no way I was going to stand behind the dictator who made the lives of my family and many other Iraqi families miserable. And to my dismay, many of the fellow activists and people we used to go out to the street together and shout for democracy and liberty and freedom, those people opposed the war on the basis of opposing imperialism and took the side of Saddam. And that was when we parted ways. I fully endorsed democracy, against tyranny and dictatorship and spreading of democracy. And of course, this was the time that Washington was interested in spreading these ideas across the region. And I moved here to the US to help in the spreading democracy agenda. And it's been a trip of 2 decades of doing what I've been doing since.
How challenging was it for you, Hussain, to take a divergent view than I'd imagine many of your peers had?
Well, it's hard. It was hard back then. It's still hard now. When I parted ways over the Iraq War, I lost many friends. And then I came to realize that reason is not really the debate. The debate is tribal honor. And most of the time, even if there's no physical threat to your security, to your personal security, there's a lot of social shaming that goes on. So people just expect their friends to think like them. And there's no expectation that, you probably have a better idea, and that's debated. So discussion is in short supply. And plus, the concept of liberty is really in short supply over there. So the idea that the public space should be engineered along certain guidelines is really still in fashion over there. But anyway, it was hard then, it is hard now. It's social shaming, and now you add to it physical threats. Not only me, anyone who would be a dissenting voice. And I know that there are many people who support what I say. I'm still connected to dozens upon dozens of friends and cousins and second cousins. I come from two humongous families, and all of them, on WhatsApp and on social media, they send me private messages. They say, look, we love what you're writing or what you're posting, and we support it, but we're scared to press like, because if we do, we'll be in trouble. We have to wake up in the morning and walk down the street, and everyone will be shaming us. So I understand how the game goes on, and sometimes I think, it's hard, but I'm probably the voice of not only my own self, but maybe many others who are unable to speak while living there, or even while living here, and they're just facing the same social pressure from their social circles, even here in the US and the West.
Yeah, Hussain, before we get on to news of the day, just one other point, because you aren't a lone voice, and just very anecdotally, after October 7th, I had a friend in the Middle East. I don't want to say his name. I don't want to even say which country, but he messaged me to say, I am tired of this fundamentalism. I want to get out of here. I just want to go to Europe. And when he just out of the blue, totally unprovoked, sent me that message, I thought there have to be many, many more just like him. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm currently on a WhatsApp group with at least 20 friends whom I knew since the days of Beirut. And some of them are still in Lebanon, and others are in Dubai or Europe or even here in the US. And they were like me, and they switched, they matured, they understood the world, they gave up on the policy of slogans and populism and politicking, and now they have families, they're raising kids, they understand cost and effect, and they understand national interest and personal interest. So we're talking about a generation that's smarter than the US or the Western mainstream media makes it look. So if you read the Western mainstream media, there's a fictional imaginary unicorn called the Arab Street. And this Arab Street is supposed to be thinking like one monolithic block all the time. So if you read this, this media, it would never occur to you that there are voices that are different. There are voices that, like share whatever we're saying over here in a different way. But anyway, like I'm saying, there are at least 25 friends on my WhatsApp group. There's a group of 15 friends here in Washington, D.C., and we meet once a month. And we disagree with what they call the Arab American politics of, supporting protests and rallies and riots on college campuses and, what have you. We disagree with this kind of politics. And all of us are, they're as native as me. They grew up over there. They know the region well. They still have family and friends and are really connected. And we disagree. We don't think that the problem over there is because of Western imperialism or because of Israel or because of whatever we were told when we were young. We think that the problem is from within, and the solution is introspection, and introspection is missing. A few of us, like myself, think that we should be the voice for this introspection. If others can't say it, I'm one of the lucky ones who have the space to express myself about introspection. And like I said, dozens of people I know personally who support. Some of them would speak out, a minority of them, but many others are still just nodding in silence.
Okay, we're going to touch on that a little bit later on in our conversation, but I do want to move on to news of the day, if you will. And as we record this on Tuesday, the 21st of May, we'll be releasing the episode in about 2 weeks or so. Headlines around the world are still abuzz about that fatal helicopter crash of the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi. And I'm just wondering if you can share your general thoughts.
Well, I tend to try to believe the simplest storyline. So in this case, I'd say this is just an malfunction and just a crash. But I'm sure that many will not believe this story. And whatever the investigation says, everyone will be thinking of the possibilities that this crash has changed. So what we know is that this guy was one of two people who were preparing to succeed the supreme leader Ali Khamenei, and now with him gone, the only one left is Khamenei's own son Mujtaba. So I'm sure that this situation will just generate lots and lots of conspiracy theories. Now, this brings to my mind a similar conspiracy or accident that took place in 1989. The cousin and the brother of Saddam Hussein's wife and his childhood friend was the defense minister of Iraq, Adnan Khairallah. And he was on his way back from the north to Baghdad in a helicopter that also crashed in a similar way. And Saddam formed a committee, and the committee said this was just, a malfunction, but no one believed him because Adnan Khairallah had emerged as a hero after the war with Iran. And he would have been the only alternative to Saddam should the army execute a coup. So he was taken out of the way. And after that, Saddam went on to hollow out the Iraqi army. He replaced it with the Republican Guards. He gave the Republican Guards to his sons-in-law that conspired against him and defected to Amman, and then he brought them back and killed them. And after all of this, Hussein, his younger son, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, was supposed to be his successor. So sometimes it's destiny. Sometimes, there might be some foul play. I can't tell. But what I can really tell is that this changed so many things. In Iran, especially that Khamenei is 85 now, and I'm sure that he's really preparing for succession as we speak.
Sometimes it's just bad weather, Hussein.
Of course, yes, of course. Sometimes just malfunction and bad weather, no foul play.
And these things happen. And that moment of silence at the UN Security Council for his death, I was absolutely aghast at that. I thought, would they do that for Pol Pot?
Absolutely. To me, it was a moment of disgrace. And, especially that we know that this man was responsible for killing hundreds and hundreds of dissidents and protesters. And his government cracked down on all the women of Iran for removing their hijab or for various reasons. And, to look at the UN and watch how they never observed any moment of silence for the victims. Instead, they observed a moment of silence to the killer of these victims. That was really, mind-blowing. It's something that's really disgraceful.
And they lowered the flag, the UN flag, at half-staff as well this morning, I saw, which again, I think is absolutely preposterous indeed. When we talk about the region, and of course we have to address the proxies. And so I'm guessing you think that this won't have any change to the proxies, the Iranian proxies, the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas?
So the way the Iranian regime is designed is that you have two states. You have the actual state, which has the elected president and the regular army, the Artesh, and the institutions, and that this state is much weaker than the actual state, which is headed by the supreme leader and the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And these guys are the actual power, and the state is really irrelevant. So what we have now is that this guy, who's important in his own right and was supposed to become, or probably, succeed Khamenei as the supreme leader, but until that happened, he was still irrelevant. Now, his foreign minister, now we learn that he was really involved in coordination between Iran and the militias. What I know for a fact is that after the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the prominence, all the prominence went to Lebanon's Hassan Nasrallah, the chief of Hezbollah. So even though Nasrallah is Lebanese only, but what we know is that he's very prominent within the chain of command of the IRGC of Iraq. So when the militias in Iraq or Syria, or sometimes even in Yemen, fight or move or whatever they do, most of this is commanded by Nasrallah himself. So the chain of command of the IRGC doesn't always go through Iranian nationals or the Iranian state. It so often goes through other people. So, for example, when Soleimani was killed, the guy who was killed near him was an Iraqi, Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was the chief of the pro-Iran Iraqi militias. And this was, his number two, and he was not even Iranian or in the Iranian state. He was an Iraqi guy. So the IRGC is designed in such a way that it's cross-national. And at this point, Raisi was not yet prominent in this chain of command, which tells me that whatever happened to him will not really affect the chain of command and whatever plans and preparations that the RGC or the militias have going forward.
Interesting. Another headline, just switching gears, the ICC arrest warrant for Netanyahu. No question in particular, but if you just want to share your thoughts on that, Hussain.
Well, again, I mean, the whole international justice system is not credible. I mean, when I was younger, and by younger, I mean 10, 15 years younger, I had my hopes up and I pinned my hopes on the special tribunal, the UN Special Tribunal for Lebanon. And this was the one that investigated the assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. And the tribunal found out that Hezbollah killed Hariri, and they indicted 5 Hariri members and found at least one of them guilty. Where are the people? Where are the Hezbollah commanders? Whoever went after Hezbollah? What's the worth of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon? Nothing. I mean, and look at Syria. What's the worth of whatever justice system that the UN has? Nothing. So to leave all of this and just go focus on one issue in a few months and I think the ICC said that the reason is humanitarian aid, so they were not really saying it's an issue of the casualties among Palestinians. It's just, it looks politics, it smells politics, it looks politicking and populism. So when they're doing this, they're just eroding confidence, Western confidence and international confidence in these institutions. And I think, in 2003, Belgium tried to play this populist game, and they allowed its courts to handle international cases. And at the time, I think they started building a case against late Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. And they were, the case was advancing. And then at the time, President Bush's administration told Brussels, listen, you either cut it out or moving NATO headquarters out of Brussels. And then, in Belgium, they're smart, they thought, okay, there's no reason why we should be doing this. And that they just, killed out the whole thing. So I think this time the US should do the same thing. Just tell the UN, listen, you guys, every $1 that the UN spends comes from Washington. So you either cut out whatever you're doing, populism you're doing, or, you wouldn't get money from us. And I think that probably changed some calculus for these guys at the ICC or the UN.
Interesting. Well, I want to talk about Saudi Arabia now, Hussain, and if you can reflect really on their role post October 7th, both as a player on the sidelines as well as an active participant, because we should remind our listeners that they were actually one of the countries that bolstered Israel's response, along with Jordan, for example, in the region, to that Iranian missile attack.
So let me just quickly give a background about Saudi Arabia. So when I first moved to this country 20 years ago, the discussion was focused on 3 points that we thought the Saudis were not doing, and these included that the leadership was really aging at the time. Saudi Arabia was not fighting its own wars. It relied on America for every war, big and small. And number 3, the Saudi Arabia used to sponsor and export and fund a radical version of Islam. So these 3 points were the points that I remember starting 9/11 that were really bothering us here in Washington. And then in 2015 came this young prince, Mohammed bin Salman, currently the crown prince, MBS. And he just reversed all of this. Number one, he's very young, so now the leadership is not aging anymore. Number two, he fought a war with the Houthis in Yemen to stop ballistic missiles from hitting Saudi Arabia. So they were not waiting for us, they were just sending their own boys to fight. And number three, he really, really took Saudi Arabia away from radical Islam and made it moderate. So these three issues have, he's checked the three boxes that we've always wanted since 9/11. And to think that after all of this, we're still treating the Saudis as, okay, we still don't like you. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. Now, what we have to add to all of this is that when MBS looked at Saudi Arabia, I think he saw in the UAE a good model that he wanted to copy. And this model is based on transforming the economy from one that's relying on oil rent to a services economy that relies on knowledge. And to do this, you need to minimize animosities around the region, and you need to maximize bilateral trade and diplomatic relations. So the Emiratis did it, and this resulted in them going to peace with Israel. And by the way, they went to peace with Israel for no reason connected to the Arab-Israeli conflict or Palestinians or, you name it. They went to peace with Israel for their own national interest. And they say that. They say this is a sovereign decision. This serves the national interest of the UAE. What you see in Saudi Arabia since 2015 regarding Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict is this. This is totally disconnected from the old idea that Saudi Arabia will be leading the Arab and Muslim world and, bringing all of them to peace with Israel. This is different. This is Saudi Arabia coming for Saudi Arabia. And I think this is how nations should be, nations should be seeking their national interest, whether economic or otherwise. So MBS started this trip, and he was following in the footsteps of the UAE, and we saw several steps, including opening the airspace to Israeli flights. And that was not only for Israeli flights. That was just like, now we have our airspace open for everyone. So what I'm trying to say here is that what MBS is doing is for the best economic interest of Saudi Arabia. And this will include peace with Israel. And this movement was going forward until I think the Iranians got really alarmed. And the Iranian axis, the Iranian-led axis that they call the resistance axis, got really alarmed and thought that they should do something to stop it. And along these lines came October 7th. I think October 7th, threw a wrench into the normalization, but it did not stop it. And we've heard MBS and many other Saudi officials say that, from the day that the Gaza war ends, we will resume normalization from where it stopped. So I see a real and genuine Saudi interest in going for peace with Israel. And, they see it as their own national interest, and this is good. Now, what you see after that is that you bring in the two-state solution, you bring in Washington, you bring in parties in Washington that don't like this anyway. They don't like Saudi Arabia no matter what the Saudis do. And things start to look complicated.
Well, I guess they're saying we're doing this for our own best interest and we want all these add-ons.
Well, that's the point. I mean, when they reached out to the US, they said we have these three ideas, which include you giving us civil nuclear technology. You give us a NATO-like mutual defense agreement. You promise us that you will not threat with stopping arms shipment. And this is, by the way, this is not only a Saudi issue. I mean, we have to agree on the idea that if we are selling arms and if we have allies, this can't be a point with which we can threaten our allies to force them to do what we want. I mean, the last thing that our allies want is to have their main sponsor be so inconsistent in terms of arms shipments mid-war. And we did this to the Saudis mid-war with Yemen, and we said, okay, sorry, we stopped shipping offensive weapons to you. And we were thinking of doing the same to the Israelis. A couple of weeks ago, we told the Israelis, we're not shipping 36 tons of guided ammunition or something. I'm not a military expert. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
So this can't be the case with the Saudis or with anybody else, with any government that we consider to be a friend or an ally. So the Saudis are seeking these 3 points in return for peace, which again reaffirms what I'm saying is that they're seeking their own national interest. Now, here comes Washington, and Washington is the one that's saying, okay, no, look, listen, we disagree with this, and we have to add the Palestinians on board. And if you look at the rhetoric that comes out of Saudi Arabia and Washington on this issue, it was divergent at first. Now it's very recently that the American position got where the Saudis are. What the Saudis have been saying is that we are willing to sign peace with Israel for these perks that we get from the US, and in return for an irreversible course toward a Palestinian state. This does not mean a Palestinian state. This means that, we put it on track, and if things move, they move. But, if they don't move, we're signing peace anyway. What Washington said at first, 6 months ago, they said, okay, this will happen only if there's a Palestinian state. And that was not what the Saudis were saying. Now, very recently, I heard, Secretary Blinken and other officials who were saying the same Saudi line of an irreversible course. And there's a big difference between these two ideas. So now we're back to the course. And I think course is reasonable. The Saudis are saying, look, we will sign peace. Just promise us you wouldn't throw the Palestinians under the bus. And they understand that they can do more. Now, the Saudis understand something that Washington and most of the West, I'm not sure whether most or not, but part of the West doesn't understand. And that is, for peace to happen, you need the Palestinians to step up. No one can step up for them. The Saudis can't do it for them. The Jordanians can't do it. No one. The Palestinians have to have their own government that speaks on their behalf. They can't have, all sorts of, Fatah signs peace and Hamas suicide bombs its way through Israel. I mean, that's not a way to build any kind of state, 2-state, 5-state, 10 states, whatever kind of states. So what's missing here is that what America is saying all the time is saying what should happen. What's missing is how it should happen. What should happen? Okay, we have a dozen ideas that have been brewing since 1936 between the Israelis and Palestinians. We can pick any one of those. That's not a problem. What we need to figure out is that how, if we say 2-state, okay, who's the other state? Israel is a state. It has its government, elected government. Who's on the other side? Hamas, they want to destroy Israel. The other guy, Abbas, he can't even control Jenin as we speak. The Israeli defense forces have to go into Jenin every now and then for sting operations against violent Palestinian factions. And we think that this guy who can't control his own backyard will be able to govern Gaza. So, like I said, the what is missing here. And I think the Saudis are saying, okay, you take care of the what, we're out of this. Just say we will not throw them under the bus and we'll be happy with that.
So the what is missing for that Palestinian state. My question then is, how about the how? Like, how does it get to the point where there is one voice that is a Palestinian state, or are they just too far apart at this point to even become a reality?
No, I was saying that the what is there. We know, there are schemes, 2-state, 1-state, 5 states. We have all the plans. We've discussed all of them over the past 100 years. The missing is how.
Mm-hmm.
If we decide on 2 states, how? Where's the Palestinian party that we can talk to? I mean, in 1993, we decided, okay, this guy Arafat, he looks like as if he talks on behalf of Palestine. Okay, Arafat, let's talk to you. And the world talked to him, the Israelis talked to him, and then Hamas never listened. Hamas were on their own. So this has been always the issue with, the how is the issue. How do you implement whatever idea that both sides agree on? Whether 1-state, 2-state, 5 states, and this is missing. And unless Palestinians step up and decide and say, okay, listen, this is our national project. We agree on this project. And, we want Israel to talk to us about this project. Unless they do that, whatever we say will be irrelevant. I mean, Hamas says from the river to the sea. The kids on college campus said from the river to the sea. This means that Israel should cease to exist. What Israeli government can take this offer? I mean, it doesn't make sense.
One of the things that I find so frustrating, Hussein, is the notion that people aren't focusing on the Palestinian side. And they're not saying you have all of these different voices, but they're not speaking as one central voice and one rational voice. And again, it's the how. How do you foster that they can speak as one rational voice indeed? Well, I want to then turn to Gaza then. Then how do you think and what do you think and how should the day after look and what might it look like? Because those are two very different things, right? The shoulds and the how might. And do regional players have a role? If so, which ones and to what extent you think would their level of engagement be?
So the point here, the cornerstone of whatever agreement between Israel and the Palestinians is trust. And now there's no trust. I mean, especially after October 7th. So the Israelis want a partner to whom they can entrust their security. Mm-hmm. Suppose the Israelis were, after they were done with Gaza or the West Bank or whatever territory, they handed it over to Egypt or to Jordan. They do it overnight. Mm-hmm. Because, these are two sovereign governments that the Israelis trust and can coordinate with. And they are sure that if they hand over this territory to these countries, there'll be stability. Whichever way these countries decide to govern the West Bank or Gaza, maybe, make them autonomous, maybe, come up with whatever idea you want to come up with. The point here is that Israel wants to make sure that if it ever concedes any inch, it has to be in the hands of people it can trust, not people like Nasrallah and, the Iranian-led Axis. So this is the basic question. So what the Israelis are thinking now, and they're probably not saying it because of domestic Israeli politicking and back and forth, is that once we're done clearing Hamas, who's the Arab partner that we can trust to have them run Gaza? And there have been a few ideas such as, okay, maybe the UAE can help. Maybe the Saudis can help. Maybe, we can get a council sponsored by the UAE and the Saudis and the Jordanians and the Egyptians. And this council can start with policing. And if it proves itself, it starts assuming a bigger role. Remember Salam Fayyad, the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority? He started a small... he started at a small office, and eventually he stood up a Palestinian police force trained by us, by the United States. And, he was doing an impressive job, and the economy was growing, and, things were looking much better than they are now. So what the Israeli and probably the Emirati think is that we need a pilot program to kick things off in Gaza. And if it works, we expand it and we build on it. And, the more it succeeds, the more independent it becomes. This has to be gradual. This can't be okay, tomorrow you get out and we'll run it. I don't think the Israelis trust such a scenario. And I think the Emiratis and the Saudis are willing to play such a role. They're saying, okay, we'll be happy to give a hand. And maybe there'll be a council, maybe a Palestinian council that includes former officials, Dahlan, who lives in the UAE, Salam Fayyad, who lives here in the US. I mean, all these guys who have proven themselves to be a notch or two above the others. Majid Faraj, who's the commander of intelligence in the West Bank currently. I mean, these guys are tested, and, the world has worked with them and can work with them. And you hand over Gaza to this council with support from the friendly countries, and maybe things start improving. They can police, they can perform, they can govern, and as they police more, it gets bigger and bigger. And if it really succeeds, then you copy the whole thing into the West Bank and you take it from there.
Got it. So very much stay tuned, really. Now, you just hinted at the UAE. So I was going to ask you about the Abraham Accord countries. Where do we go and where do they go in a post-October 7th world?
So because like we said, these countries are pursuing their national interest. They see their interest in maintaining their peace accords and bilateral trade, and and cooperation with Israel and the Israeli economy. Now, mind you, the Israeli economy is the third in the region. It's the size of the UAE economy. We're talking about two countries who have a population of 10 million, roughly, and with a similar GDP. And the bigger economy, the bigger economy would be Turkey, and then the biggest would be Saudi Arabia. So an economy as dynamic and one that relies on knowledge and technology like Israel is really a good prize economically for any country that knows its interest in the region. And the UAE understands this, and Bahrain understands this too. And the Moroccans also understand this. So what you see in the Abraham Accords is a peace model that's totally different from let's call it the older peace model, which was Egypt and Jordan. The older one was that the Egyptians and the Jordanians said, okay, we will sign peace, but this will not mean that we will preach peace to our population or that we will seek economic cooperation with the Israelis. This means that in return for peace, we get handouts from the United States. So the old peace is some sort of the US renting out peace from these countries. Okay, here, get, this is your money and just stay at peace with Israel.
Rent a peace.
And that's why, rent a peace, exactly. And that's why you haven't seen the people to people. And that's why you still see a lot of social shaming, whether in Egypt or Jordan, against their own government or against anyone who seeks real peace with Israel. Now, this is not the case in the UAE or Bahrain, or I haven't been to Morocco. I've been many times to the UAE. In the UAE, it's people to people. You talk to people, they say, okay, we're at peace with Israel. We're having joint conglomerates, whatever, multinational corporations, all kinds of trade stuff. So that's the UAE model is different. And I think the Saudis are seeking the UAE model. What they want is people to people. What they want, actual economic benefit, not handouts from the United States. So the Abraham Accords countries understand that their national interest is in these accords and maintaining them. But at the same time, they have to show some sympathy with fellow Arabs. So if you watch their media channels, if you read their newspapers, they're saying, we feel bad for all the Gazans who were killed. We want ceasefire. We want peace. Kind of the generic stuff that you would read everywhere. They will never go as far as the pro-Iran or the Iran-led Axis media, when they say, okay, this is bad and Israel must disappear. So they're not saying this. They're just saying, let's have a better region. And their pitch has been, really, if you observe, if you monitor the Emirati media and the Saudi media since October 7, they've been always saying, look, this is bad because we haven't achieved peace. They're saying that the alternative to what's going on is peace. Whereas if you look at Iran and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and these guys, and they're saying, well, this is bad because Israel is bad because we haven't decimated Israel. So the solution is to get rid of Israel completely and destroy it. And these are two different pitches, even though when they come together at the Islamic Organization Summit or the Arab Summit, they sound as if they're saying the same thing, that, the war must stop. But if you read closer, they have two different messages. One is for peace and one is for the destruction of Israel.
Just as an aside, Hussain, to go back to Saudi Arabia establishing ties, normalizing relations with Israel, and then the UAE also haven't done it already. I remember at the time of the signing of the Abraham Accords, people were saying, well, the UAE doesn't do anything unless Saudi Arabia gives its endorsement or says yes or no. And I'm just wondering, is that the case, or did Saudi Arabia or did the UAE just do it because they said, look, this is in our national interest and, we don't care what Saudi Arabia says? If you can talk about that dynamic then.
Well, this applies mostly to Bahrain and to a lesser extent Kuwait, who are much smaller than the UAE. And in the case of Bahrain, with much less resources than the others. So the Bahrainis rely almost totally on Saudi Arabia, whether for economics and finance or for diplomatic protection. So the idea was that if the Bahrainis signed this peace deal, then the Saudis must have given them a nod. But that doesn't apply to the Emiratis. But what I would say is that, and at the time, both countries said this is a sovereign decision, and the Saudis agreed. They said, this is a sovereign decision, and the Saudis couldn't say no because they know that other Arab countries or their allies, such as Egypt and Jordan, these also have peace treaties with Israel. So it's not like the UAE was going to an uncharted territory where no one has been before. So the Saudis were pretty much on board. Now, the self-perception in Saudi Arabia, and this is true to a great extent, is the Saudis, they have the biggest economy in the region, and therefore the biggest muscle in the region. So they thought the Emiratis and the Bahrainis can sign on their own terms with Israel. If we sign with Israel, we will have different terms. And what you see now is that the ask for peace that the Saudis are asking, whether from the United States or from Israel, is much bigger than what the UAE asked at the time. UAE said, okay, promise us you will not annex parts of the West Bank, Jordan Valley, and promise us that the US would sell us F-35 fighter jets, which we haven't done until now. But I mean, these were the asks of the UAE. Now, go to Saudi Arabia and their asks are much bigger, like, the three demands that we cited and the Palestinian issue and stuff. But they're all thinking along similar lines, that peace is in our national interest, that Israel can be an asset, that Israel should not be, the strawman that we use all the time to keep our people in check. And by the way, I think that's what the Iranians and the Lebanese and the other guys do. What the other guys do is that, look, we're failing, our government is failing, and that's because of imperialism in Israel. And that's not what the Saudis and the Emiratis do. The Saudis and Emiratis, they have a successful government and say, okay, we have success, and in order to make it a bigger success, then Israel can become an asset, or Israel is an asset and we should use it.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that just as a point of clarification. Well, Hussain, we've mentioned and invoked Egypt several times already in the conversation, and it's been reported that tunnels from Rafah went into Egypt to resupply Hamas. The question is, what role did Egypt play, and what is the dynamic then with Israel?
Well, I'm not sure to what extent the Egyptian government was aware of the tunnels, but I would say, knowing how the Egyptian government is designed, I would be surprised if they didn't know. Now, were they happy? Were they, I mean, I'm not really an expert on Egyptian affairs, but I think that Egyptians should not have let those tunnels to be dug in the first place. And Israel should have really taken this issue up with both the US and Egypt, because part of the Camp David Treaty and part of the US alliance with Egypt, it has 3 points, and these 3 points include the free navigation through Suez Canal, basing rights for the US and overflights in Egyptian airspace. And the third, which is actually the first item, is the security of the Egyptian border with Israel. This is an important part in our alliance, the US alliance with Egypt, and in Camp David. And I see that the Egyptian government has miserably failed on this count. Mm-hmm. So this should have been an issue a long time ago. Now, since it's, let bygones be bygones, and this is history, I think the least Egypt could have done was to allow the Israeli Defense Forces to operate on the Egyptian side, to cut these tunnels. Had the Egyptians allowed that, they would have made things much easier, especially in terms of, on the Egyptian side, it's not really populated. So you can really go and operate there without fear of risking civilian lives. Like the Israelis are doing now, they've pulled already 1 million out of Rafah, and they're trying to get everybody out. It's a complicated process. But had the Egyptians said, okay, listen, we understand, we dropped the ball, come here and we'll help you shut down these tunnels, this war would have ended a few months back. Yeah, and it's really regretful that the Egyptians have not done this yet.
Hussain, before we get back to the region, I just have a general question. Where do you get your news? And from which sources? Where do you get your information? How do you stay up to date on everything? And I recognize the fact that you do speak Arabic. So many of our listeners do not. I do not. So where would you suggest we look to get our news, to get our information, really to understand what's going on in the region?
Well, personally, I can also read Hebrew and I understand Hebrew. So I'm either listening to Hebrew broadcasts or reading the IDF releases. In case of Arabic, I go on Telegram and I check out whatever Hezbollah and Hamas are putting out in their own words in Arabic. I have Al Jazeera running in the background all day long, which really gives me a heartache. But still, I mean, this is something that I have to do.
Have you checked your blood pressure lately, Hussain?
I mean, I should probably bill them for my health care bill. So anyway, but what I do is that most of the time I'm seeking primary sources instead of going to secondary sources. And so many times when I'm reading the Western press, I see error in translation or location or background or dates so I don't trust most of the news outlets in the West. Now, alternatively, you can go to there are a lot of people who invest a lot of effort, whether individually on social media or whether what we do at FDD is that we have something that we call the flash brief, and we have people who speak these native languages, and so I get quoted on the flash brief, and fellow experts get quoted all the time, and we pick the most two important stories. We have in the morning we have a morning briefing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, most often presented by my colleague John Chanzer. So we try to put out through our own modest resources news for people to understand that there's a better story. There's a different story. There's if you go to the original sources, you'll find something else. But it's really regretful that if you're an average Westerner, you can't find something that you can really rely on in terms like the big U.S. media. And by the way, on social media, I find myself correcting Western media almost daily. Pick this story and say, okay, listen, this is wrong, and you got this wrong, and this guy belongs to the other team, and whatnot. And it's unfortunate, but I wish there was a magic pill or a wand that I could just wave and make everyone go to this one site and get their news from.
Well, Hussain, we do know that many of our listeners already follow you on X, and we want to encourage everyone that does not follow you to go to you, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, on X, and see your feed and what you're sharing with everybody. And also, we do want to give a shout out to your colleague, Jonathan Chanzer, who's been here on the program twice, actually. He's just a brilliant guy, as are you and everyone else at the FDD. He, of course, is the vice president for research over at the FDD, and he does his regular programs, and I have found them so incredibly useful, whether it's just him talking to camera or the guests that he brings on. So again, folks should follow you if they don't already, and they should also follow Jonathan Chanzer as well, and the FDD in general. And just to go on to the FDD site, I guess it's fdd.org, right?
.org, exactly, yes.
Right. So let's stay in the whole media realm, if you will. And again, as we're recording this, I saw you post it today. The Times of Israel had a headline, the 21st of May, 2024, and I'm reading it here. Ex-BBC chief, network's Arabic service rife with anti-Israel bias, support for terror. And I'm going to read something here from that article, which said, the gentleman in question here is Danny Cohen, and the article says, quote, noting that the network has been forced to issue some 80 corrections, that's 80 corrections to its reporting since Hamas's October 7 onslaught. Danny Cohen, who led the network's TV department in 2013 to 2015, wrote today in the Telegraph, quote, something is going badly wrong. Mistakes don't happen 80 times. I'd love you to talk about the bias of the BBC, and you also posted how your own experiences with that network, and I'm sure with other networks as well.
Yes, of course. So with the BBC, I've been probably once or twice, once with the Arabic service, and on the spot there was no chemistry. We were talking about Syria. I found out, or I felt that whoever was anchoring the show was totally pro-Assad, and I did not sit back and take it down lying. I pushed back, and that was it. And that this probably happened many years ago. And the same happened. I was once talking about Lebanon on BBC English, and the same thing happened. So it's a hostile environment for anyone who's trying to push an agenda of liberty or democracy. Even someone like me, I'm neither. I was not born in the West. I'm not an imperial guy. I'm Iraqi, Lebanese, native, indigenous. All the words that you want to add to my name. So I can also add that I. You're probably aware of this. There's a Congress-funded Arabic TV called Alhurra, the free one, and this gets a grant of $100 million a year from Congress. And these are the guys who recruited me 20 years ago. This is the reason I came to this country. And I joined Alhurra with the idea that this is where we're going to spread democracy and the message of liberty in Arabic. And I lasted 3 years only. I couldn't last more. And this Alhurra operates from here in Washington, D.C. And people like me and a dozen others, native Arabic speakers, you can never see them or watch them on Al-Hurra. They never invite us. And this is, I find it really absurd. I mean, this is, you have an Arabic channel, you have people who work for American think tanks, put them on the air, and they don't know what they do is that they invite people who speak like us, but who are not native Arabic speakers. So for example, my colleague and friend Jonathan Shanzer would be invited, but that's because if Jonathan Shanzer is saying something to an Arab audience, he would be considered as a foreigner. Whereas if Hussain Abdul-Hussain says something in Arabic to an Arab audience, that doesn't really bode well for them. So this has been unfortunate, I mean, I can cite at least a dozen of people with my profile in this town who are, whose mother tongue is Arabic, and they're never invited. And so we're technically throwing $100 million a year on a station that puts out messages that are biased toward Hezbollah or Hamas, or and the BBC is like this, and a bunch of other stations are like this.
And how do we affect change then within these organizations?
Well, if we had enough time and resources, we'd probably be spending more time talking to our representatives on the Hill, saying, listen, guys, this is our tax money. We're funding this station. We're funding its sister radio. And these people are not putting out the message of liberty and democracy and freedom that we want to put out. These guys are most of the time taking the other side, the side of Iran or the side of Hezbollah or the side of these guys. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. I know, there are certain programs on Hurra that are great, but by and large, the editorial policy is not the best policy that, the mission statement of these organizations were put together. I know that, or I remember at least when a channel like Al-Hurra was founded, the idea was that we had to counter the misinformation that Al Jazeera puts out in Arabic all the time. And I thought that was a cause really worth fighting for. And we ended up just, saying what Al Jazeera is saying, but at a much lower voice, because Al Jazeera's budget is probably 1 billion, so 10 times as much. But still, I mean, there's no reason why we should throw money and get nothing in return.
Right. Well, staying with the theme of information, disinformation, and the like, what goes through your mind and what has been going through your mind when you see what's been going on college campuses? And I'm not only talking about the student protests, or useful idiots, as I would call them, a little editorializing from me, but also in the classrooms, with the professors, with the administrators, with giving in to student demands, as some of these very, very elite universities have done. Where do you see this going? Do you think it's just going to evaporate because the school year is ending? I personally don't think so. And can you also address, I know this is a rather broad topic, but if you can also address some of the foreign money that's behind the protests as well.
Okay, so on the first part, let me just say that whatever you see that's called Arab American is not really Arab. That's only Arab American. And this is totally different from what's Arab. So what Arab Americans say here does not really represent what the Arabs say over there. Whatever Edward Said used to say here and pretend that that was on behalf of the people over there, that was not the case. And this happens to me because I'm someone who's originally Arab. And when I'm here, the Arab Americans, myself and Arab Americans are two different things. I call myself an American with Arab heritage. So I don't have a specific political identity. The Arab American political identity is part of the US scene of identity politics. So, and that's why what you see now is that they say something in Arabic and something else in English. So from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in English. The same slogan in Arabic is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab. So what I'm trying to say is that what these non-Arab college students who are showing solidarity with their friends and supporting, and they don't understand what's going on over there. You know, it's Hamas doesn't allow LGBTQ, for example.
Can I interrupt you just for a second,
sure.
though? Can you say both expressions in Arabic and point out the difference?
So the English one is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In Arabic, Palestine Arabiya, which translates into from the water to the water, Palestine will be Arab. So, and it's the same rhyme. It's the same, but in Arabic it rhymes when you say Arab, and in English, they change it to free.
And the original intent was Arab, wasn't it?
It's always been Arab.
Yeah.
So the point is that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab. And I'm sure the ones who are singing it, even in English, know where it comes from in Arabic. So this is just one idea of when, I saw the other day a student from Colombia standing and demanding, whatever he was demanding with a kufiya and the Palestinian flag. And he was wearing a crop top. And I was thinking, you wouldn't last a day in the streets of Amman or Beirut. You can't even walk there. So be careful what you wish for. So what you see here is not really the debate. That's what you see here belongs to the debate over here, colored people versus white people and Asian American versus Arab American and all these kind of things. This debate does not go on over there. Over there, we're Muslims and we're Arabs and we want to win and want to beat the others. And we're not in a coalition with the fellow colored people or stuff. So this is number one. And I always teach my kids this. I don't want my kids to grow up to be Arab American. I'm saying that I always tell them this is a debate that's particular to the United States. This is not, this is not the message, or this is not the debate of where we come from. So this is number two. Most of what you see on college campuses has been driven by organizations that are funded mainly by the government of Qatar. And we know that at least 6 of the big US universities, Georgetown, for example, Northwestern, Cornell, these guys have campuses in Doha, and they get a huge amount of money from Qatar. And in the Georgetown case, they even have one of the royal family, the Qatari royal family, who sits on the board of Georgetown. So there's this line that's being blurred all the time. But mind you, an organization like ours, the FDD, we never take money from any non-US nationals, alien, whether government or individuals. And if we do, we have to register as foreign agents under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA. There's no such rule for a university. And this means that a university like Georgetown can take a lot of money, tons of money, $700 million, and then they can report whatever they want to report, and it's just voluntary. So I think this has been a blind spot for our legislators and our policymakers, that we don't see the enormous amount of money someone like Qatar is pumping onto these campuses. And then you add to that the Students for Justice in Palestine. with leadership who's really associated with Hamas, proven and everything. And, there's no need into going into names and dates and numbers. And then you see that this is not spontaneous. There's you look at all these encampments, and all the tents look exactly the same, or all the flags look exactly the same. And all of these encampments, you will not find a single United States flag. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm sending my son to these universities. We came to this country, we love this country, we're proud of being American. I'm not sending my son to a place where we have an issue with George Washington, and we wrap him in a Palestinian flag or a kufi, or even a Lebanese flag or an Iraqi flag. So just to say, this is not spontaneous, and it's really mind-boggling for me when I see these kids who are not from the region, from other regions, either from the US or from somewhere else, and who are towing this line without any idea of what this line means. Like, you're supporting Hamas and you're LGBTQ, and you don't know that Hamas throws them from the ceiling, or from rooftops, or you're supporting Hezbollah and you're not aware that Hezbollah wouldn't let a woman just walk down the street without a hijab on, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of shallowness and unawareness that's going on. And I think, Al Jazeera and all these outlets help entrench these. I see papers, I see lots of funding going to academic papers wherein they're bashing imperialism and calling for decolonization, and praising the global South. And of course, the global South is Russia and China and North Korea and Iran. And you're thinking, why is Georgetown University praising the global South? So all these concepts are really being used freely, and they look cool at this point. And I really can't tell why.
You just invoked China, because I know that there's Chinese money also behind the protests as well. And I just saw something that Mark Dubowitz, the head of the FDD, posted today on X. The Washington Free Beacon ran a piece yesterday that the Phoenix Suns co-owner, Francis Najafi, is a link between Jewish organizations hostile to Israel and DC's pro-Iran voices. That was the headline that was given. So it's not only Qatar, which of course really does give the lion's share, but it's all these other countries and these nefarious organizations that are really brainwashing our young folks, and they're also supporting these universities. And at the end of the day, someone said that Harvard is actually just a hedge fund that gives out degrees. And so I think a lot of these universities really just want a buck, and the money is, and they're looking at where's the money indeed coming from. Again, a little bit of editorializing on my side. Just a couple other really quick bases, actually, if you don't mind, in the interest of time, Hussain. So then how do you affect the change for these students to think differently? Is that possible? And I want you to address it not only here in the United States, but you hinted at it at the very beginning of our conversation, that you said that the Arab Street isn't a monolith. So assuming that those people that are in agreement with liberty and democracy are there and they already understand what that's all about, but what about what seems to me the vast majority of people who are thinking differently? So how do you affect that change both on the Arab Street of those individuals, as well as here in the United States of what I like to call those useful idiots that are on campuses?
So first of all, just on your point of China, yesterday, the official China in Arabic account on X put out a post that said that they had monitored a C-17 military, US military aircraft that took off from Azerbaijan and landed in Israel around the time when the helicopter of President Raisi came down. And that was the post. And they were implying clearly that not only the US, but also with Israeli help, they shut down the helicopter of Raisi. And this was in Arabic, and no one corrected. Now, of course, I took a snapshot and made fun of them, but I'm just giving you a preview of how all of these governments are trying to to spread misinformation.
And
My colleague at
if
FDD.
I can interrupt you there also, because it seems to me that the Chinese, I don't think the Chinese government, and I lived in China many years and I understand the country. I don't think that they're anti-Semitic or anti-Israel per se. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think they're looking at this as an issue that can divide the country because they just want to create divisions within the United States. And so I think that's what it's about. It just so happens to be that this is the issue of the moment.
True, but they also have programs similar to the Qatari programs of trying to fund and take over universities.
Oh, sure.
My colleague and good friend Craig Singleton worked on this extensively and managed to get a couple of universities in the US to shut down the Confucius Institute. They were using these partnerships to copy US military technology to China, among other things, and spread propaganda to kids. So we know that they're behaving in a similar way that the Qataris and the Iranians are behaving, especially using or going after our weak points, which would be university campuses. Mm-hmm. So they do this all the time, and I'm sure that the Russians are doing it too, through RT. And sometimes we do catch them. So, for example, the U.S. government did sort of shut down Russia Today and the Chinese channel here in Washington because we said, listen, you guys are foreign government agents. And this is the example that I cited recently when everyone was angry that Israel shut down Al Jazeera. I said, listen, guys, we're the biggest democracy on earth, and we did shut down the government stations of Russia and China, and the Israelis are doing the same with Al Jazeera. So these outlets are not exactly free speech outlets. These are propaganda arms that we're dealing with. And now they're copying this into X and Facebook and the rest of social media and TikTok, and also on university campuses. And what they have that we don't is that they're central, so they have a central office with lots of resources, and they, go after certain targets. And we're not. We're open societies. We look vulnerable to these guys. Now, some great people like my colleague Craig Singleton single-handedly went after the Chinese and Confucius and had some successes. We tried to replicate this program at FDD on Qatar, and we reached out to university and we said, listen, look, this is what's going on. You've been receiving this much money at university campus in Doha. There has been this preacher who was saying, may God kill all the Jews. So are you certain that you want to have your campus on, and you want to have your students in Doha going to this mosque where this guy says, I wish all the Jews to be dead? And, they just tried to defend themselves. I mean, we couldn't really make them change their mind. And this is really hard in Washington because President Biden declared Qatar as our major non-NATO ally. And it's really hard to reason with members of Congress and say, listen, Qatar is doing these bad things. And then members of Congress would say, look, but, our president just declared them major non-NATO ally. And, so it becomes really complicated in the case of Qataris. And we have one of our biggest air bases in the region over there in Doha. So, but still, I mean, we have to call a spade a spade. So whenever we see them do wrong, I keep on photo capturing Al Jazeera news reels in which they call whoever is killed on the Palestinian side or Hezbollah, they call them martyrs, and they call the elevation of martyrs to heavens. And whoever is killed on the Israeli side, they just say killed Israelis, not martyrs, not going anywhere, just almost celebrating that they were killed. So the language counts, and I think they count, or they think that since they're in Arabic, no one is there, they're not on the radar of the US government, or no one is watching and they can get away with stuff. But Al Jazeera is pure anti-Semitism, and they use Zionism instead of Judaism. But I mean, it's there, and even the daily newspapers in Doha, I read them all the time. The editorials, the op-ed columnists, it's all anti-Semitism. It's the protocols of the elders of Zion are still a thing, and they discuss them, and they say this is Netanyahu's next step. And you're thinking, what age, what time am I living, or what am I reading?
Was ever thus, I'm afraid. Listen, as we wind down our conversation, because I'm super mindful of your time, truly, I would really be remiss if I didn't ask you about the future of Lebanon, especially given the thousands of Lebanese displaced in the south. Of course, Lebanon is a country near and dear to your heart.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that Lebanon would have been the first to sign peace and join the Western world. And I think Hariri did a great job trying to bring it close, and for doing so, Hezbollah killed him. But I think the single most important thing in Lebanon is to try to make Hezbollah and its associates pay price for going after dissidents. I think if we manage to give some sort of immunity to voices that disagree with Hezbollah from physical threat, I think that'll be a huge achievement. A friend of mine, very close friend of mine, Luqman Slim, a Shia who used to live in the southern suburb of Beirut, which is a hotbed of Hezbollah. He was very outspoken against the party. And 3 years ago, they kidnapped him, they shot him with a silencer. And all that you got from the US was Secretary Blinken calling on the Lebanese judiciary to bring the perpetrators to justice. And that was that. And this makes me really unhappy, especially when I see, all these US mainstream media raising hell over Khashoggi. And rightly so. I mean, I'm not, but I mean, why do you give one person all this fanfare? And Luqman was just killed in silence. And my other friend Hisham al-Hashimi in Baghdad was also killed in silence, and no one made an issue out of it. So these individuals count, and we have to make them pay for it, or we have to try to offer them some protection, not only the one side of the story. So this is really important, and I don't think we're aware of it, and I don't think we're doing it. And like I said, to go back to the monolithic block called the Arab Street, these guys would have proven that it's not monolithic. And so often than not, there's a narrative, especially in US media, that the governments at peace with Israel are doing so against the will of their population. And I think this is total nonsense. Because, okay, well, you think these guys are, how about the Lebanese? I'm Lebanese. If I was not afraid for my security, I'd go stand in the middle of the town, of the square in the town of Baalbek, which is, where I grew up. And this is where Hezbollah was founded. I'd stand in the middle of the square, Ras Al Ain, and call for peace with Israel. And I'll say by peace, I mean peace now. And by now, I mean yesterday. And I do that. And, but I mean, I wouldn't last a minute. So, and then they tell you it's a monolithic. No, it's not. It's, I mean, if you let people speak out and say their mind, what's on their mind, the narrative would be very different. So this part, I think, even, I'm not talking Democrat or Republican over here, but I'm especially addressing the progressives and Democrats who claim that they're defending, the underdog. These are underdogs in Lebanon and in Iraq who are trying to fight for freedom and liberty and democracy. And you don't care about them. But we should. I mean, I think everyone should.
All right. Final question. And we want everybody, because I've just pulled it up here to make sure that I get your Twitter handle right. I've been following you since forever. It's at HAHUSSAIN, HAHUSSAIN. I have you on automatic there, so I don't even know what your Twitter handle was. That's why I had to look it up.
Thank you.
But really, I wanted to ask you just really as a final question before we both push off into the sunset. You are very prolific, very active on Twitter, on X, shall we say. That's what it's called right now. Is there a message that you hope your followers take away from all of your posts, Hussain? Is there like a underlying theme or thread that you want them really to understand from what you're posting?
Yes, 2 points. Number one, I'm never engaged in ad hominem. I'm interested in debating everyone and anyone, with me or against me, whatever they have, throw it at me. If you're being respectful, I'd be happy to debate you until forever. Number two, my point or my motivation or what keeps me going and ticking is introspection. I want things to be fixed in the Arab world. I'm speaking out because if I don't, these things that are bad, no one will be talking about them. So this is my motivation. And I'm not interested in Democrat versus Republican or this tribe versus that tribe. I'm really interested in fixing things in the countries that I came from. And along these lines, I think peace is the cornerstone of making things or fixing things. And I think when we get to that point, we will understand that each one of us has a great value and that Israel is an asset in that part of the world. I don't want peace for just, okay, look, leave me alone. Just let's have peace. No, let's have peace and be friends and trust one another and exchange knowledge and exchange interest. So that's my message. And unfortunately, sometimes it goes through. Many other times I'm just getting, paid, chill, stuff. I mean, and I'm fine with that. It doesn't really bother me. It never gets under my skin. But, for whoever is listening this and wants to engage, they're most welcome to. Just keep it respectful. And with the idea that our the end point should be to fix things, not to have a shouting match.
All right, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, we're going to leave it right there. You've been so generous with your time, enlightening with your comments. We just want to thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of IsraelCast. I knew that before we even started, I wanted to have you back. Okay, even before we started the conversation. So I hope that you'll come back for around 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steven.
All right. And for more info on Hussain, of course, you can go to the show notes page of this episode on our website, jnf.org/IsraelCast. And we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. And just so you never miss an episode, I don't know why you would want to do that. Do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Simply search for IsraelCast. It's so easy. And don't forget to rate and review us, 5 stars, of course, because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more folks around the world to find us. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. And as I always say, it takes a whole shop to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Dara Shapiro, JD Krebs, and Ellie Cadrin. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios, right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top until the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say hello, I know Hussain would love to hear from you, and so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.